Right after the time of Christ, the disciples were writing their books and they were being persecuted and spreading out, and people were copying these letters and copying the Gospels and spreading them out. Persecution hit the church and they spread out everywhere. And for the next 1,000 years, there was horrible persecution against the church. And if they caught the heretics, the Christians, they would burn them at the stake and burn their Bibles. Well, people were spreading the Word of God around, making all kinds of copies. It takes about 10 months to write out a copy of the Bible using a pen. Now, you don't even have a good ink pen. You got a feather and you got to keep dipping it in the ink. And keep cutting a new point on it. You don't even have a good ink pen, nor do you have good paper to write on. Lumpy parchment, stuff like that, or leather. But anyway, with all the obstacles they had, plus, being persecuted, it took about 10 months to handwrite a copy of the Bible. Well, they're making all these copies. By the time you get to 15 and 1600s, persecution lets up, and so people decided to collect the Bible copies together from all over the world and compare them and put it into English. Now keep in mind, some of these copies of the Bible had not seen each other in 1,000 years. There might have been people in France that were copying the Bible, and people in Africa copying the Bible, and people in China copying the Bible. And you can only use a book so long and it wears out. And after maybe 1,000 years, you might be on your 4th or 5th generation from the original, but that's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter as long as the copying process was accurate. And a good way to check that copying process and see was it accurate is after each of these, the French ones and the German ones and the English ones and the Chinese ones, each go 5 generations. Now let's get the 5th generation and compare them all and see how accurate they are. And that's what happened in the 15 and 1600s. They got all these scrolls together, found 5,000 copies of the Bible that survived the persecution, and they were identical in everything except spelling. People's names, Peter and Pedro, stuff like that had changed. So they said, man, God truly preserved His Word. This is it. This is word for word exactly. He preserved it. So, meanwhile, down in Egypt, there was a group of folks, sort of like Jehovah's Witnesses. They were a cult. They came to be known as the Alexandrians. The Alexandrians did not believe in the deity of Christ. They didn't believe in the bodily resurrection. They didn't believe in a lot of Christian things, kind of like Jehovah's Witnesses today. So they made their own copy of the Bible, changing things they didn't like. They made about 6,000 changes. The primary guy in this cult was a guy named Origen. He was the leader of this cult in late 2nd century, 3rd century. The only mention of Alexandria in the Bible is when they were disputing with Stephen, arguing with the real Christians. And if you trust the principle of first mention, which I think is very important, then that'll be important to you. They say, wow, the only mention of these folks is bad. And so anything out of Alexandria, anything out of Egypt, period, in the Bible seems to be bad, But Origen started this, or was the primary guy in this cult. They made copies of their Bible also, with their changes in it. And some of them survived. In 350 A.D., several copies were made, and 3 of those still survive today. One was found in the Vatican Library, and it's called Vaticanus. One was found in Alexandria, Egypt, and it's called Alexandrus in the Latin. And one was found in Sinai Peninsula in a monastery from 350 A.D. And so that one's called Sinaiticus. Well, these 3 scrolls do not agree with each other on anything, nor do they agree with the real Bible. Okay? They're all different. The Catholics, or the monks, translated these 3 ancient scrolls into Latin centuries ago, and it became known as the Latin Vulgate. Vulgate for vulgar means the common language. Okay. Then the Catholic, by the way, the Latin Vulgate was a really good translation of a bad book. Then the Catholics came along in 1582 and translated the Latin Vulgate into English with the Douay Confraternity or the Douay-Rheims version of the Bible. And that was a really good translation of a bad book. Westcott and Hort were 2 Greek scholars. I don't know if they were even Christian or not. They probably claimed that they were, like a lot of people do. Okay? But they took these 3 old ancient manuscripts. They didn't agree with each other, but their thinking was, these are older, therefore they are better. Well, I'll go along with the older part. I'll agree with that, but that doesn't mean they're better. But they synthesized them into one new Greek manuscript and sold it to the world in 1875 and said, we have the oldest and best manuscripts available now for you to translate. And they got the oldest ones all right. The oldest ones that survived is all. Doesn't mean better. Then people started taking their Westcott and Hort version and translating it into English. First one done 1881 as the Revised Standard, then the American Standard, the Revised Standard, the revised version first, then the Jehovah's Witness Bible, the New World Translation done in 1950. This was a good translation, fairly good translation of a bad book. Then the New American Standard, the NIV, the Good News, the Amplified, the Living Bible, all of those, and I have a lot of them. There's the New American Standard. I think the guys who are doing this are sincere, dedicated, highly intelligent, godly Christians who are translating the wrong book and don't even know it. There are basically only two Bibles in the world, in the English. The one's translated from what's called the majority text, the King James, of which there are now 64,000 manuscripts. At the time King James guys did it, they only had 5,000. And then there's the whole other family of Bibles, all translated from the Westcott and Hort. So you have two choices. The question is not, is it a good translation? The question is, what are they translating? Okay? Here's, for instance, NIV, Acts chapter 8. Let's see, Adam, read verse 37 to me. Acts 8:37.
I can't do it.
You can't do it. It's not there. There is no Acts 8:37. They removed it, and they removed the number, okay? Now, in the New American Standard, they at least put a footnote. In Acts 8:37, it says, see footnote. But the verse is gone. Down at the bottom it says, late manuscripts insert verse 37. No. Guys, you got it all wrong. Those supposed early manuscripts you're going on are the ones that took it out. It wasn't that the later guys inserted it, it's that the earlier guys took one out, that's all. There are over 200 verses totally missing from the NIV. Older doesn't mean better. So, there are more manuscripts of the Bible than any other old book. Homer's Iliad, for instance, only has about 650 manuscripts. In 1946, they found 24,000 more manuscripts. Then the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and now they have 64,000 manuscripts that support the King James, and 3 complete manuscripts and 46 fragments that support the Alexandrian.